Hello, innovators, and welcome to another episode of the Heitland Show, where I connect the dots of innovation and entrepreneurship with my guests. Today's guest is Executive Director at Draper Venture Network, a global alliance of member funds who are present on all continents. He's a former Kauffman Fellow and musician. Sid shared his story growing up in Sambia, Africa, living in the UK and Tanzania before he moved to Silicon Valley. We talk about which problems startups should solve, how startup founders develop, of course, funding, and dive a bit into education and music in the end. Please welcome to the show Sid Mofya. Hello, Sid. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Jens. Good to see you.
Good to see you
Thanks for
again.
having me today.
Yeah, it's so great that we made it. Still remember the time when we have been in Barcelona together and drinking a couple of beers, a couple of weeks
Yeah, me
ago.
too. Yeah, that was so much fun. I went to that conference not knowing what was going to happen, and the most meaningful connection I made was when you randomly reached out and said, "Hey, nice website," and then that followed with drinks and meals and meeting friends, and yeah, I'm just so grateful that we met.
And it was not a sales pitch like some people might think. Like,
No, 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 and yeah, several weeks later, we're on a podcast. I'm on your podcast, which it's an honor. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, cool. Looking forward to learn from you specifically, of course, about startups because that's you have a lot of expertise around that, and a lot of listeners will be interested in that. But before we go into that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I was born and raised in Zambia, and for those that don't know, Zambia is a country in southern Africa, just south of the Congo, north of South Africa and Zimbabwe. About 12 million people, so reasonably small country. My parents worked in the mining industry there, and I went through the school system there. I'm the first of four children, and I got fortunate to be able to get into a track with school that got me some scholarships to be able to study at some of the good schools in Zambia, and then subsequently study abroad as well. So I studied chemical engineering in the UK, and I worked in the UK as well for a while. And I've worked in different places, Tanzania, and now currently working in Silicon Valley, where I run a network of venture capital firms that invest globally. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, married with two beautiful daughters.
Nice.
That's a very quick run.
Yeah.
We can double click in,
Yeah,
in,
we
in,
have to
in areas. Yeah.
because you told an awesome story. How did you end up as a chemical engineer and then from a chemical engineer going to Silicon Valley working with venture capital? How did that work out?
That's a great question. So growing up, I wanted to be a doctor. So this gets even stranger, right? I really wanted to be a doctor, but I didn't want to study in Zambia because it took a long time. The medical degree in Zambia was the longest degree. And then at the time, less so now, but at the time we had real problems keeping at the time the one university. Again, it's different now. There's a lot more options, but at the time we had real problems keeping that one university open. So it was a 5-year degree that could take you 10 years, and I guess I was impatient. Um, and so I had an opportunity to apply for a scholarship with the company that my parents worked for and who were my sponsors for going through high school. And they were training up young Zambians to go study in the UK and in the US and then come back and work for the mines. And you had several options. You could do anything you wanted as long as it was electrical engineering, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, or geology, or maybe there was one other or something like that. So I thought, well, there's an opportunity here. And I looked at the engineering options I had, and I thought, well, I guess chemical engineering is kind of close to medicine. So I'll do that. And then at some point, I'm going to change. So that's how I became a chemical engineer. I've never gone back to medicine, but I actually don't regret the decision to do chemical engineering.
It's really cool. And how did then that lead to going to the US and working in Silicon Valley with the venture network?
So after school, university, I worked with Shell in the UK, and throughout all that time, I had this real passion to go back to the African continent and work in some way, some shape or form that was impactful. I didn't know exactly what it was that would my contribution would be. So after several years at Shell, I got all my engineering badges and everything. I really felt, okay, I've done the engineering thing. I was a good engineer, but I'm probably not an engineer at heart. This is not something I would do for the rest of my life. So let me figure out what is. So I took some time out. I went and worked for the government in the UK running energy programs. So there was a bridge there. And then I went and did a business degree. And the idea there was the business degree would really help me think through what are the business opportunities that I could do when back in Africa. And the whole goal was after business degree, I'm going back to Zambia to figure out what to do. So after graduating from business school, I was looking for opportunities in Zambia, to land with a job, soft landing, and then figure out what to do. I actually couldn't find anything in Zambia that was a fit, either, I was, not qualified or too qualified, or it wouldn't work with my family at the time. My wife and I had a 3-year-old daughter, so we were, really thinking about family and how that works. But something came up in Tanzania that looked promising, so we decided we would move to Tanzania, which is right next door to Zambia. And so I took a job with a nonprofit that was building a new business entity in Tanzania, and they needed somebody to be there who was African enough to understand the local culture, Western enough to understand how they think about the world from the West, but also had an entrepreneurial bent to them, so that they could build something new. So that looked like a good fit. And so we moved to Tanzania, and we were there for 3 years. And while I was there, I was thinking about very carefully about what can I do. So I'll take time out and I'll go to these big local markets, open air. They sell literally everything there, and there was no map, so you'd have to ask around to navigate your way around. And Tanzania speaks a different language to Zambia. They speak Swahili, which has a little bit of similarity, but it's different enough that it's a new language and you have to learn it. And I very quickly had to learn it because living in Tanzania as an African man, people just assumed I spoke the language. And the moment they discovered I didn't, that was, my reputation went downhill. So this is a sidetrack, a little sidetrack, but I gave myself a target to learn to get to 5 minutes in a conversation before somebody discovers that I'm not Tanzanian. Because if I get to 5 minutes and then they discover that I'm not Tanzanian and I'm speaking good Swahili, then my reputation goes up, not down. And it took many months of daily lessons to get to there, and I eventually did. But with that, I'd go to the market and I'd start speaking to people. Hey, what do you do? What's your business? And how does your business work? And what are the constraints and so on? To just try to discover, what it is that, I could be helpful with. And my original thesis was that it's education. People just need to know how to think about business in a different way. And to some extent, that's true, but by and large, it's not. most people know what they're doing, and they can run rings around anybody else who tries to do the same thing that they're doing. But it was more structural. It was more about funding and access to resources. That was the real constraint. So at the same time I was doing that, a friend of mine who I knew from high school approached me and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of starting a fund to invest in African entrepreneurs. Will you work with me to kind of to frame this?" What he wanted to start was a venture capital fund. And I'd studied venture capital in business school, and I didn't like the model. I thought it was a waste of money overall. I think my views have changed on that since, given I've spent so much time in the industry now. I've probably drunk the Kool-Aid. But yeah, I genuinely believe there's real value that venture capital brings that is not measured in the way I was thinking about it then. So I initially said, well, I'm not that keen on venture capital, but maybe let's work on something. Let's frame this, and we'll see where it goes. But in the process of doing that, I actually got into it quite a lot, and we were getting quite deep into our strategy. But coming up against the barrier of, both of us had no experience in the industry, no real network. So we both decided we need to spend some time to do that. So that's when I started looking westward and outward to anybody who can talk to me about venture capital. So I started reaching out to people in Silicon Valley. I applied for the Kauffman Fellows program, which at the time had a part of the program was dedicated to folks that were not in the industry yet, and that's changed now. You're not in the industry yet, but there's a chance that you will get into the industry and engage with a firm that will sponsor you through that program, so that you can do that program. And that was really helpful for opening doors for me, because being able to say I'm a Kauffman Fellow to somebody who's in the industry, everyone knows that name. So I was able to have lots of conversations, including with what was then called the DFJ network, as it was transitioning to become the Draper Venture Network. And so that conversation led to me moving to Silicon Valley to join the Draper Venture Network and build my network and relationships with and experience in the industry. So that's the kind of roundabout journey. But I guess the string that pulls it all together is really this desire to have impact, and I guess some kind of willingness to follow my gut when the data does not necessarily correlate.
Yeah, that's I think a big thing as well when you work with startups. Sometimes you don't have the figures yet, and you need to believe in the people and a little bit in the gut. I guess, at least I've never invested that much into that world, so I don't really know how that works. But before we go into startups, Kauffman Fellowship, can you give a little bit of background of what that is for the people who have never heard about it?
Yeah, it's an amazing program. I think it's been around for something like 25, 30 years. And the whole idea of the Kauffman Fellows program is you're bringing together the best brains in investing to, number one, network with each other and create opportunities together. Number two, think about the craft of investing and how that's changing, and learn together. And so they run every year, and I think it's when I did it, it was somewhere between 30 and 40 people every year are selected to be a cohort, and that cohort moves together through the program over 2 years, and you go through the whole life cycle of investing and thinking through. And a lot of people are either already investing in their own funds, or they're starting new funds, and they're thinking through that. One of the great things that the Kauffman Fellows really do is It's not just about investing, it's really about the person, the human. So there's a lot of self-discovery, there's a lot of leadership development in there, and really building strong bonds with that group. So for example, I did the Kauffman Fellows program 2014 to 16. And that group of people that I did the program with, we're close. We're in contact pretty much every day, every other day, in our WhatsApp groups, or whenever somebody's traveling to another place. The first people I'll reach out to in a new place where I'm visiting, from a business point of view, are my Kauffman Fellow friends. We get together and we're helping each other out, and yeah, so it's a really amazing program for the way that they curate the people and the culture that they build.
Awesome. Let's get into startups.
Cool.
So, getting some detailed questions, some little high level, we will figure that out. So, if we look, you now working across different markets and having a global understanding, as far as I can tell, what are different problems you think are not solved, where more startup founders should look at?
That's a great question. And I guess I'll probably have a personal bent to this question. There's some problems that I'm still flabbergasted that we don't have a solution to. My and I, when I say my personal view on it is my personal experience of problems that I feel we shouldn't have. So I was talking to my mom yesterday, because it was my daughter's birthday, so her granddaughter. And my mom has real problems sending anything from Zambia to here, whether it's money or something physical. It's a real problem. It's a lot easier, not necessarily easy, for me to send stuff to her, but the other way around, it doesn't work. So problems like that, where we have the rails for people to be able to send money anywhere, but there's some places where that doesn't translate into the ability to do that. So things like that, and we're literally like one step away from a solution to a problem like that. Being able to transact across the African continent is so hard. That one is a harder problem because the geographical borders are they create a political structure which is difficult to break. But it's more expensive to so living in Tanzania and trying and with family in Zambia, it's more expensive to do business between Tanzania and Zambia than it is between Tanzania and the UK. So things like that. But if you think more globally, I think, and I'm glad to see that there's a lot of activity in this space. I think the issue of climate is big, and I think we need even more brains working on it, and not just climate. I think I'll think of it broadly as resource, not just efficiency, but effectiveness. How do we reorganize our energy use as a planet to make sure that we have enough energy, because we actually do fundamentally have enough energy, but we waste it and we don't direct it in the right places. So I feel like those are like big problems that we need more entrepreneurs to be working on.
Nice. If we talk about startup founders, what are traits you have experienced over the last years of successful startup founders? Successful in my eyes, they've survived the first 5 years and scaled their their business to a proper level where you could say, okay, that's a company that's going to survive and working?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a great question. So just to set the scene, so the organization I run the network of funds. I'm not investing myself, but I work with a lot of founders and meet a lot of them. And I think there's what I see with, I've been here long enough that I see a journey with founders. Um, I see a level of obsession with what they're doing, that it's almost like an extreme obsession, um, um, which means they don't give up, because being a founder is really hard. Um, um, but also they have the obsession, but they also somehow have this flexibility to be able to, as they learn from the market, to, to figure out how to meet with the market with what they're doing. Um, I think that combination is really powerful. There are a lot of factors outside of the founder's control, timing and so on. But I think internally, that, and then their ability to lead people and get people to commit with them on the cause that they're doing, whether those people are co-founders or investors or employees, advisors, etc.
Yeah. The leadership is an interesting one for me because this is a kind of a skill or a capability, especially in a startup. I come from the big corporate world where you have leadership trainings and you're like the first team leader, and then you get a special training, and then you're getting a department head after a couple of years. You get a special training, so kind of you get all the different stars on your shoulders to be able and allowed to be a leader in a formal sense, in a management sense. In a startup environment, that's not really existing because it's like, yeah, you start a business and you kind of get a couple of people together, which maybe in the beginning is like friends and family, and that this naturally grows to something, and then you are a leader and you need to take care of them, and it's not
Yeah,
really the case.
yeah, and it's very interesting, the transition the founder goes. I was reading a blog post a couple of days ago about um, a founder who was moving on from being the CEO of the company. They brought in a new CEO, and
Mm,
he's moving to the board. And he was talking about his personal transition.
yeah,
It's like at the beginning, I was literally wearing all the hats. I was everything. I was chief salesperson. I was chief product officer. Then we brought on a co-founder who was a really good product guy, and I was mainly chief salesperson. Then we got our first big client, and I became account manager. And it's like the job keeps changing, and I really feel like the startup journey is an amazing leadership development crucible. Probably one of the most devastating in its impact on the person, because there's so many jobs to do, so many jobs to learn to do, and all this time you've still got to make sure you're the leader, and you're taking responsibility, and there's people that are relying on you. So there's a lot that the founder goes through, a big transition, and then the company changes from small and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then if you become a public company, very different kind of company to what you started,
yeah,
barely 7 years before, or 14, or whatever it was. So there's a big development trajectory.
yeah. Do you see any patterns in this that, let's say, for example, in my leadership career in the corporate, I've had a mentor who is kind of a senior person, kind of nudging me a little bit along the way. Do you see the same things happening in the startup world?
Yeah, I see that, and I also see founders being part of mastermind groups,
Hmm.
which is small groups of people that are kind of your peers, going through the same issues. I think when you're able to just create that space to be open and vulnerable with each other about what's really going on,
Yeah.
I think that really creates the ability to be able to handle and manage those things, and also just knowing that you're not the only one. There's other people going through this. I think it gives strength.
Yeah. Let's go into funding. That a lot of startup founders who are listening is like, okay, finally talk about the money piece. So maybe start high level from a founding perspective. And I've never considered this myself. At least what I have learned, there are startup founders who are founding a company to sell it later on, and or founding a company to say, hey, this is my baby, I want to nurture this my whole life.
Mhm.
Are there different ways on how they attract investors in these two ways?
So the VCs, for talking specifically about venture capitalists,
Hmm.
they have no interest in the latter kind of company where you're founding it to to keep it forever, because the VC business model relies on there being an exit
Yeah.
event. Um, so I guess my answer to that would be, if you're doing the latter, then you're probably more likely to raise debt, which you repay back from the cash flow of the business and
Hmm.
not equity. But the former, where you're starting the company with the intention of having an exit event, then you can raise equity partners, because that's their incentive for being part of it, because they know there'll be an exit event. Obviously, plans and may change as well in the future, so um, I'm sure there's some gray area in
Yeah.
between.
What are the main differences from a fundraising perspective towards Europe, if we compare Europe and the US? At least what I have heard, um, to tell you a little bit where I come from, it's way harder in Europe to get at all funding for startups, and what I heard, at least in the US, it's way easier. And as well, the numbers are vastly different. It's like to get 50,000 euros in Europe is very hard, and in the US, what I've heard, to get 100,000 is like, yeah, it's not a big deal. Is that true, or is that just different mechanics I don't get?
Um, yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but definitely the US dominates the fundraising environment. I think it's something like 70% of the capital, or 60% of the capital, is in the US.
Hmm.
So so by the law of numbers, you'll hear more people raise capital in the US than raise capital in Europe. So it feels easier. Per capita, I don't know.
Hmm.
There's lots of companies that are being started in the US. Um, probably probably more per capita than in Europe.
Yeah.
Um, so so in another sense, it might be harder in the US, because well, there's more money, but there's also way more companies. So I don't know if it's objectively harder or easier, but I know it's not easy either way.
Yeah. Yeah, I was guessing that. Maybe it's also from a mindset perspective differently, that you have in the US a different mindset where you say, hey, I go for it and I
Hmm.
try it earlier than you might do. Let's say if I come from Germany, then in Germany, coming from Germany, for me, it's like, yeah, you don't go to someone when it's not perfect yet.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
maybe as well a limiting factor in approaching capital.
Yeah. I've heard that sentiment, especially from like European advisors of startups, or investors in startups, where they feel their founders could be more aggressive.
Yeah.
I guess in America, that's kind of encouraged, and I guess it's the culture. So the European cultures tend to be more conservative, and I think both cultures have their place. But I guess for fundraising, the aggressive approach tends to work better.
Right. So let's go into details. Imagine there's a first time founder. They have they have a good idea that's solving a real problem in this world, and there's a market potential to capture that.
Mhm.
What would you recommend this founder who has never done anything towards fundraising and never built a business before to approach this fundraising activity?
So at what stage are they? They've got some kind of prototype and they've
Yeah.
tested it, and there's a feeling that there's
Kind of there's a little bit traction going on. They see, okay, people are getting interested, they're willing to buy um the service or whatever they're doing.
uh-huh. I'd start doing a little research on who's investing in the kind of thing that I'm doing.
Hmm.
So so that match is important because not everyone who's an investor will invest in just about anything. So I'll do some research and have a list of those people, and then start hitting them up for conversations. Put your best foot forward and say, hey, this is what I've got. This is where we are so far. Here's the promising feedback I'm getting from customers. Would you like to chat?
Yeah.
And if the matching is right, a lot of investors will want to chat. I think the thing to remember is the investors also want something. So the closer the match of what I'm offering is to what they're looking for, the more likely that we'll have a conversation. A lot of investors, they're so overwhelmed with um, inbound
Hmm.
that it might be better if it's possible to get a warm introduction from somebody that they know. It just increases the chance that you get a conversation, and it's not for want of it's not because they're bad people and don't want to meet. It's just they're just trying to allocate their time. So something like that will help you get to the front of the queue. Talk to enough people to validate. So use some of the best advice I've heard from founders is use the conversations with the VCs, not just to raise the money, but to learn,
Hmm.
because there'll be things that you learn about the business that they know because they see so many businesses, whereas you're working with one. And really use it as an opportunity to learn, so that even if you don't raise any money from them, every single conversation is an opportunity to make that product or the pitch or your understanding of the market better.
Would you then say, at least in my approach, I would say, okay, I will talk first to a couple of before I hit the one I really want to target.
Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Because at the beginning, there's kind of this raw ambition,
Hmm.
and but maybe there's not as much finesse with what the offering is. And is it Mike Tyson who said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face?
Yeah.
So those first few contacts, make them little jabs, not uppercuts, right? To get ready for the for the folks that you really want to be partners with.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a good part to talk about the personal development of the person. Um, you mentioned already that they're on a track of personal development the whole time from a leadership perspective, but I think it's also from a confidence, like talking to the first VC, you might not
Hmm.
be confident at all. It's like you don't know you might have read about it, you did your research, but you
Hmm.
don't really know what they're asking for. And then they're punching you into the face, like you said. It's like, okay, I take that punch, but then standing up and doing it again, I think that's very important from a personal development aspect.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the fundraising journey is one of the most humbling journeys because most of the answers will be no. Uh, and then all for good reason. But if if the founder learns from it, then they'll get the few yeses that they need in order to be able to build.
Yeah. And it's at least for me, I've never done it in that way. I think it's not that you need to have the big check. It's more about getting something that helps you to get to the next level and then proving that you're successful. Because
Exactly.
then I guess at least if you show that success, then people are more willing to put more
Yeah,
money into it.
yeah, exactly. Peter Diamandis, the founder of X Prize, he has a great quote. I think he calls it I think it's risk staging or something like that.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on the exact phrase, but basically it's saying, look, you're only asking people to take, you don't want them to ask them to commit to the whole thing. Get them to the next stage, the next level of risk, um, you know, and then prove that point, and then get the next level of capital for the next level, rather than trying to boil the whole thing into one. And I think that's very wise.
Yeah. One thing I've had a call this week with a couple of fellow former, at least, corporate innovators, and one thing we commonly said, when you come from the corporate world and you do your first entrepreneurial gig, where it's like you found your own company, even if it's a consultancy or something, you're used to the big money. And the problem we have had, all including me, we have burned too much money in the first year, all of us,
Hmm.
because we're used to that. And I think the tricky thing, or the positive thing in that way, as a startup founder, you start with zero money most of the time, at least,
Hmm.
and then you can't burn that much. But I think it's very important to have a look at that from the beginning, that you build something that is kind of making money. It sounds weird, I know, but I have seen it over and over again where a startup hasn't done any income for 2 years at all. And I'm not sure if that's common, or if that's something that's you wouldn't recommend.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my answer to that would be it depends. It depends what you're doing,
Yeah,
because sometimes it takes 2 years to build to the point where you get some revenue, and that's where you bring in venture capitalists as partners. That's where they excel, because they help you to bridge that gap while you focus on building.
mm,
They understand that, okay, I'm putting my capital at risk so that you have time to build. But there are some cases where that time is not being used well, and as an investor, you want to, you want to see some return for it.
yeah,
But if the understanding is, look, I'm solving a hard problem, and in order to solve the hard problem, I need this talent, and we need to really go into the bunker and and build something. And in 3 months, we want to be able to test it with customers and get their feedback. We won't be able to get any money for it because it's just the kind of product that people don't understand yet. So I think there's a case for that, and that's the classic reason to need a venture capitalist,
yeah,
because they're seeing the potential, and they're saying, oh yeah, you've identified a great problem which I think needs to be solved, and I think you are the people to solve it, so I'll back you to be able to do that. So that's, I guess, fundamentally what I think venture capital is for.
yeah.
um, but it's also abused because sometimes it's like, well, yeah, I think we need to get some money here. Yeah.
Talking about these skills, if we look into the education system, the development of young kids and people who are growing up right now, at least in my history, grown up in the 80s and 90s, there was like zero education towards that. Even in in the university I did, there was like not really, of course,
Mhm.
theories of how you run a company and how you do bookkeeping, but that doesn't really prepare you to run a company.
Yeah.
What do you think we would need to change to educate entrepreneurial ways of thinking early on from childhood? Or if you have the opinion that should be done, of course.
Yeah, I think about it a lot because my older daughter is 15, and thinking about her education, and we think a lot about that, and um, we've tried so many different things. I think ultimately entrepreneurship education should start way earlier than we started. Um, I would very happily sacrifice a lot of the stuff that we learn in school to get kids thinking about how to start a business and how to run and maintain a team. Um, yeah, so I played sport when I was a kid, and I feel like sport is underrated for its value
Mm, mm.
because it builds that ability to think about success as a team and how do you get success as a team. So more sports, more time thinking through the lens of. Uh, I think in general we're very bad at thinking through the lens of capital.
Oh yeah.
It's not something that we think about. We learn in school at all. Um, we kind of take the knowledge and assume that somebody else is thinking about the capital. But I think the world that we're moving into, if the vision of the vision of Web3 is realized, for example, all of us will be our own bankers, but we don't
That's
have the skill.
difficult.
We don't have the skill to do that. We don't even know what the role of a banker is
Yeah.
in our society, let alone our own lives. So I think a lot of that kind of learning would be amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know how we get there, but that's what we need, I feel.
Agree. Fun story. When I was meeting, it was around Christmas last year, with a buddy of mine in Germany. What we both said is that our parents, so they are now in their 60s and upwards,
Mhm.
they haven't learned that as well, so they haven't trained us in the same way.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
basically a whole generation or even two generations which
Yeah,
have never learned this. Of course, if you have worked in a finance position, maybe you have had more of that. But people who have not worked in a company where they have not really connected to finance, and it came up through a conversation around like his parents owned a house, and like they owned this house for 40 years and it's still not paid back, and like now the grandkids are born and they're basically they're inheriting the debts of the grandparents which have not.
right.
It's like that. It was so out of my thoughts, at least from a capital perspective, and I'm
Mhm.
really struggling right now. My daughter is 4.5. Like, how do I teach her? How
Right,
do I teach her the value of money, because she's now running around? Yeah, if that's broken, then we need to buy something new. Like, no, that's not the way how it works here.
right. Yeah, yeah. I
It's
think, yeah, I totally agree. And it's hard. And you said two generations. I think it's three
uh,
because your daughter and my daughters, we're not equipped to teach them.
true.
Right. Right. So, so maybe the generation after them, if we get it right in the meantime, you know, we'll, we'll get it.
Yeah, let's try to at least.
Yeah, exactly.
What are your thoughts on nurturing the ambition of a young person or someone who is going towards entrepreneurship?
I think it's exposure. Um, One of the benefits we've had over the last, say, 10 years or so, when social media becomes more prevalent and you can see all the different possibilities, is now kids can see possibilities that they wouldn't have seen pre-social media, of what you can be.
Yeah.
And I think, well, that's one. That's kind of a surface exposure, but it kind of shows that this is possible, and many people are doing it. So I can aspire to be something like that. But I think a second kind of exposure, and I've tried to do this for my daughter, is go and meet real people who are doing the thing that you're thinking of.
Hmm.
And that will do two things. One, it will inspire you more, or two, it will show you the reality. There's always another side to the reality that you may not have been aware of, and knowing that reality will be like, oh yeah, okay, I can handle that. I want this enough that I can handle the other side of it, or I didn't realize it was like that, and I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So I think that exposure is huge.
Yeah. Interesting to that point. I was coaching a person inside of the company I'm supporting right now. She's fairly young, she's like 24 or something. And I was asking because she has like huge ambition. You can really feel it when you are like talking about her future. It's like, hey, where does it come from? So she was not aware at all where her drive come from.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
that's something I've had the possibility to work with someone in the past who kind of took that for me and helped me to bring that to the surface as well, for me to understand, okay, where does the energy come from, so that
Yes.
you can channelize it towards the direction you want to use
Yeah.
it. Do you have any experiences for yourself, how you did that in the past and getting where you are today?
Yeah, I don't know where ambition comes from, but it's it's almost like you can't run away from it if you have it, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it's hard to answer personally, because it's like it's just like that. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But I think yeah, for me, um, one thing that I found, when I look back, that really helped me to like harness ambition was my dad was very involved and encouraging in kind of, yeah, you can do it, or you should go and do it. And I think as a kid, knowing that it's okay to do that
Hmm.
is big, because it kind of provides the freedom um, to um, to try out things. Um, I know we're talking about entrepreneurship, but and my dad was an entrepreneur. He was very into, you've got to do well in school, but he also loved music,
Hmm.
but he wasn't a musician. But he would buy all these whenever he'd find a secondhand instrument somewhere. He would buy it and bring it to the house, and then me and my brother would play around with it. So he basically, without being a musician himself, he creates an environment where you can try things and learn new things. So I think those things help to harness that natural innate ambition, which we don't know where that comes from, but it's there. But gives it more wings to fly.
Yeah. Talking about music, I mean, we haven't scratched that at all. But you're a musician as well.
Yes.
So how did did you start being a musician? How did you learn it? And what is your favorite instrument?
Um, I'll start with my favorite instrument. It's a guitar. So I have several different guitars. I have a bright yellow electric guitar I'm looking at right now. I have my acoustic guitar down there. My latest guitar. Want me to show it to you?
Yes.
It's I don't know if you can see that.
Ooh.
This is an ngoni. It's
Uh-huh.
an African instrument. From what I've read, this is the original guitar. So before guitars became what they are today, they basically originated from guitars like this. So
Uh-huh.
this is
Cool.
from West Africa. Was played, thousands of years ago. This particular one was made for me by somebody in Oakland, so it's not directly from West Africa. But I love the fact that I can play something that has such a link to, number one, my home back in Africa, and number two, thousands of years back. Somebody somewhere thousands of years back was playing an instrument just like this. Um, yeah, so how I started in music, growing up, like I said, we didn't have like a lot of money to be able to have musical instruments, but my dad would get, you know, he bought us this little organ, which is literally like 2 octaves, like it was very small.
Hmm.
And my brother and I would play that thing to death. It was very old design. It's an old Italian design. You plug it into the power, and it starts a fan, and the
Hmm.
fan blows into this organ, and you play it. And then we would play it so much that the fan would break, and then turn it upside down, open it up, get some super glue, fix it back together, wait for it to dry up, start playing again, and 2 weeks later it'll break again, and we'll do the same thing again. And that's how we taught ourselves to play music. My brother's a much better musician than I am, so he did most of the teaching, but I was grateful to have the opportunity to learn with him, and learn to play music. And then ultimately we started playing for the church, because now if you're playing at the church, you can play the instruments there.
Hmm.
You can play the guitar, you can play the keyboards, and so on. So we started playing and singing at the church and learning there. And when I went to boarding school for high school, I made friends with the music teacher there. So I'll be able to get the keys to the music room over the weekend and lock myself in there and just play. So that, yeah, that's how
That's
I learned.
great. Yeah, funnily enough, that's how I started with music as well, because I played trumpet for over 30 years. I haven't done it
Hmm.
the last years, but it was also through church, because then you can get a trumpet and you can
Yes.
play with it. It's quite funny. So, but how do you use music for yourself as well, and for feeling well, and like, because you're a businessman, you're working with the network, you're working with venture capital. How does music play a role in your life, connect to that?
Yeah, it's for me, it's actually big. It plays a big role. I find playing music exercises a completely different part of my brain to doing the business work. And when I'm particularly busy, um, I know I need to spend more time playing music,
Hmm.
because it's actually refreshing and restful. Um, it's probably for me the thing that I would just do anyway, regardless. Like if I had all the free time in the world, what would I do? I mean, I probably don't want to play music like all the time, but it's probably the one thing that I would spend a lot of time on.
Hmm.
And so I find having that balance, because I think a lot of the business work, there's definitely a lot of right brain work there, but there's a lot of left brain. Music tends to be more right brain, less left brain, but and tapping into that is important. It helps me tap into like deeper parts of me. I songwrite as well, so
Hmm.
it helped me tap into deeper parts of me and help me understand what is going on. And I can look back at the songs I've written over a period of time and see what was happening because of those songs that I wrote. Yeah, so I love what it brings to my life. It's like I feel like my life would be half empty if it wasn't there.
Yeah, I get that. My wife is always saying, because for me the music right now is like sports and running, and
Hmm.
she's always, you need to go out running. You need to go. Okay. Then I say, okay,
Am
you're too
I being
tense.
grumpy?
Exactly.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
okay. That's the pressure valve which needs to be emptied.
Exactly. Exactly. That's awesome. She's very wise.
Yeah, someone needs to be
Yeah.
if you have a madman at home and who is working 24/7.
Right.
Cool. Let's get to the last part of the podcast. So, starting with a question I ask every guest: if you could work um, on a project that's impacting every human being on Earth, what project would you choose to work with, and why would you choose that project?
Whew, what a
Yeah, I
question.
know it's a very, very easy question.
Impacting every human being on earth. I would, and this is gonna sound very wishy-washy, but I feel it's as solid as it comes. I would build or create something that helps us all to love others at the maximum level possible.
So it's like
It's a
everyone loves everyone.
love maximizer.
I love that. Is that technology or is that something else? Like
I don't know.
maybe
I
it's a
don't know.
drug.
Maybe it's a drug. I don't know, but I feel if, and it's a simple thing to say, but I feel if that was even possible, it would be a very different world.
Yeah, very cool one. How can people reach out to you, and where can people find you?
Um, sure. Several different places. If you want to listen to music, I'm on Instagram at Mofya Music. If you want to talk about venture capital, at Sid at DraperNetwork.com.
And if you want to see the awesome website, that's how we got connected.
If you want to see the awesome website, it's sidmofya.com. And you can
And
contact me there
I
as well.
highly recommend everyone looking at it. I would love to have such a website.
Cool.
No, it's true. I really love it. It's really cool as well. How not just the visual appealing part, as well how you set it up with the values and so on. It's a really good one. So everyone who
Awesome.
is listening or watching this, you should have a look at it at least.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that.
Awesome. Is there anything we forgot to talk about?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. This was a fun conversation. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for joining. Was a pleasure seeing you again on the screen and talking to you and digging deeper, learning more about you, of course. And yeah, thank you as well for sharing all the startup nuggets you have shared. Thank you very much.
Sure
Was a
thing.
pleasure.
Sure thing. Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. You will find the links and resources in the show notes of this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, the most impactful thing you can do is subscribing to the show on any of the podcasting platforms and give me a review. This will help me to reach more innovators around the world and bring some of you into the show. If you have any question to the guest or want to engage with me, feel free to reach out to me on social media and contact me there.